So let me just introduce our practice first. Linda, my colleague, will introduce the panelists later, but the Family Systems Institute and Practice grew out of a smaller practice in Mosman in the 1990s, and in 2004 we moved to our current location in Neutral Bay. So we started seeing our first clients there in February 10 years ago, and we're really thrilled that 10 years later our practice has grown. A third of the audience here tonight are our practice. And I'll just introduce, one of our psychologists is having a lovely retreat in Bali at the moment, promoting healthy relationships and looking after herself well. That's Charlie or Charmian Ellis, but our other members of the practice are all here working hard, and we're a real team of committed people. We enjoy sharpening each other's thinking. We have regular discussions to keep up to date with the latest research, and essentially what we're on about is relationship health, even if it's an individual that comes to see us, because our sense is from our training in family systems theory that anxiety is particularly observable in our important relationships. And anxiety in its many forms impacts people's emotional well-being. And so when we talk to people, we are all about observing self in important relationships as a way of strengthening resilience for life in all the important contexts of life. So that's what the Family Systems Institute is about. We train mental health professionals as well as have a clinical practice, supervision practice, and hopefully some of you are already aware of what we've been doing over the last 10 years. So my colleagues have all done substantial training, not just in their given fields of psychology, social work or psychotherapy, but in family systems theory. And that is Vinity Gill and Karen Larkins over here, people need to wave, Linda Mackay, Meg Cook and Lily Malo, who's joining the panel tonight. So without further ado, I will start to present my talk. I did forget one other thing, however, which is our resources table, which we'll mention again at the end for any that come in a bit late, that we've got 2 tables that are the little ones that are all the resources of our panelists. So please take advantage of all that good information, not just from the organisations that they represent, but the organisations that they collaborate with. And the Family Systems Practice resource table is out there with the tea and coffee, and there will be time at the end to have another cuppa and have a look at the resources. So my presentation tonight, you've seen the topic. It's what is the core to a healthy relationship? What's at the centre of what makes relationships really work? And I wonder what you all think about when you're asked the question, what makes for a healthy relationship? The things that I would regularly hear that make up a healthy relationship are good communication, quality time together, generating respect, generating trust, security, particularly when it comes to a good relationship for children. Would they be the things that come to mind for you? Well, I want to suggest tonight that all of those things are not the core of a good relationship. They're the fruit of the core of a good relationship. They're the things that come from having an attitude in relationships that is about knowing your job description, knowing your principles, knowing what you're responsible for in whatever your relationship role is, as a spouse, as a parent, indeed as a work colleague or as a professional. Relationships are such an important part of life. So why is it that we often get confused about relationships? Well, I don't know that many of us, I certainly know that when I, for example, got engaged well over 30 years ago and married, I didn't really think about what my job description would be. The way you do when you decide whether you take a job on. You read what your responsibilities will be and you decide whether that's a good fit for you and whether you want to take that on. But in the important relationships in our life, I wonder how many of you had ever thought about what are my core tasks and duties, and probably the more important question, what are not my tasks and my duties that actually belong with other people. So I remember early in my marriage, my confusion about my job description was evident quite early. And here are two examples that I thought of. One is that the first time I started noticing my husband being upset with me, I changed. I had a signal to it, and I can look back now and see that I adjusted myself in the face of my discomfort at his disapproval. Here's another example. I can't see anyone nodding here, so is this only me that had this confusion? My other example, when I think of my confusion of job description early in my marriage, was the idea that particularly if I was upset about something my husband didn't do as he should know I would appreciate him doing, that I would be upset and he should be able to see I'm upset and know exactly what my needs are if he truly loves me. So rather than talk about what I'm upset about, I would expect that he could read my mind. So the mind-reading confusion of relationships. And I think these common confusions derail many of us in our relationships, because what they do is anxiety creeps into a relationship, anxiety about our sensitivity to distress in the other. And as we get anxious about their disapproval or them not meeting our needs or knowing what we want, our focus moves away from what am I responsible for? Who am I in this relationship? How am I going to express myself in the relationship? That gets lost. And what replaces it is a focus on the other, an anxious focus on the other. An anxious focus on the other means that we start to get hooked into the change game, either change ourselves in order to win back their approval, or take on the project of changing them, taking away their distress, taking responsibility for their moods, trying to make them a project. And that can happen in both a marriage and in parenting, and indeed any helping relationship. So the core of a healthy relationship, figuring out our job description for ourselves, not changing others. And the other core part of this is we work on ourselves. If you want a good relationship, you work on yourself, not on the other. You work on yourself. You don't even work on the relationship as a project. You work on the person that you are most responsible for growing, nurturing, and bringing your best to. This gets particularly tricky in parenting. I'm guessing a number of you are parents, and it's very tricky to think of working on self when you have a dependent child who needs you in so many ways. And it sounds a little bit like neglect, and parents get very confused about this. But have a think about the common anxiety that a young child goes through of their fear of nighttime. I don't think there's any child that doesn't at a particular point in time start to imagine, usually around that kind of 6 to 8 age group, when their brain development can project the stories into their imaginations, and the shadows on the wall become all sorts of scary things in their mind. If a child is anxious and they're crying saying, "I'm afraid of the dark, Mum or Dad," what's our job description in response to a child's anxiety? If you think about it, many parents immediately move in to taking on the job of making the child's anxiety go away. Is that something we can control? To take away another person's anxiety, even if it's a child? We can help be present with them so they find the resources to soothe their own anxieties. So many parents get into the dance with a child of calming them, soothing them, adding a nightlight, bringing them into bed with Mum and Dad, and the child becomes increasingly more dependent on the parent to take away their fears and anxieties, rather than gradually learning the resources that every child inherently has to calm and regulate their own distress. And I think you'll hear from the panelists that really the essence of good mental health is good self-regulation, good emotion regulation, and relationships can promote that by not overstepping in. Do you know that there was a survey in the United States of parents of high schoolers? It was a substantial survey, thousands of parents across the country, and they asked, how often do you do your child's homework for them? Not how often do you help, how often do you do their homework? What do you think the percentage might have been?
Very high.
It was high. 60% of parents in the United States anonymously reported that they regularly do their teenagers' homework for them. And it just stops you in your tracks to think how easy it is to forget our job description and take on the jobs that belong to the other members of our relationship group. My final question about this job description stuff is one I regularly hear with my clients, which is, isn't this a bit selfish to focus on yourself rather than focus on the other? Isn't this about self-entitlement and not caring for the people that we love? And it was only a week ago, I did have a client who was realizing in their marriage that they were helping their husband manage the chaos of his schedule. Even after our counseling session, she was, with the very best of intentions, correcting him on the time they were choosing for their next appointment, saying, I think you've got too much on that week. It would be better if we found a time another week. And we thought together about what drives that pattern of managing his schedule for him that's gradually developed over many years of the marriage. And she said to me, he is hopeless at managing his schedule. I can really be helpful to him by doing this for him, and my job description is to be a helper. And as she steps back and thinks about, is he capable of learning to do a little better? And what's the cost of me putting my energy into managing him? And this is a couple that are struggling with an underground resentment in their relationship. So the challenge in relationship health is to be yourself in that relationship, to refrain from trying to manage others. What's central to that is finding out what our guiding principles are for our relationships, what's in my control, what's not in my control to change. In my book, in the appendix at the end, I put a list of my guiding principles for managing myself in a relationship that are mostly ones that I've tried out from Bowen Family Systems Theory. Things like, I am committed not to doing for another what they, over time, can learn to do for themselves. That would be one example that I don't always get right, but I find it a really useful guiding principle for developing and nurturing healthy relationships and bringing my best to a relationship. This is the essence of family systems theory developed by Dr. Murray Bowen. It's how we all affect each other in relationships. The premise is we do, even through our facial cues with each other. We're sending invisible signals back and forth all the time. And how, when we can be clear about ourselves in the relationship, rather than making a project out of the other, that we can really bring our best to those that we care about. Thank you. Over to Lynn.